Our guest today, Lyndey Milan, needs little introduction. She's graced our television screens in print for over 30 years. She's been instrumental during this time in changing the way Australians think about food and wine via her best-selling cookbooks, TV series, and influence as former food director of the iconic Australian Women's Weekly. She's award-winning multimedia presenter, MC, speaker, food and wine teacher, consultant, a debater, judge, regional Australian specialist. She's also the creative director of Flame Media, international TV production and distribution company, and the food editor of a new positive website, Happy Ali News, with an impressive lineup of global contributors sharing seriously happy news. Lyndey, thank you for joining us today.
It's my absolute pleasure.
Sorry, there was a lot to get through there because you've obviously had a very a storied career in multiple different sectors. So it can be a little bit hard to summarize all of that. So,
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you got into cooking?
Oh, well, I started cooking when I was 16. My friend and I used to sit up the back of a classroom, and her mother used to get these magazines from overseas, and we used to look at them, and then we used to sometimes cook stuff out of it. But also my parents went overseas for 3 months, and I was in year 11, which fifth year we called it. I was in what's year 11. And then my next sister was 4.5 years older. She was at uni. My brother was recently married and he lived not far away. My other sister was overseas, and mum and dad decided that they'd leave us on our own for 3 months, so we started, I started cooking every day, really. And that's when I was 16. So it was a recreational thing. I really enjoyed it. And it's a really good way to impress the boys, by the way. And vice versa. I've got to tell you, my son was very proud of cooking when he was 16, and none of his friends did. And so then when I left school, I went to Sydney University and I did a Bachelor of Arts, and I did a double major in Fine Arts and History. And I was doing honours, but I dropped out because I finished my degree because I very stupidly got married in third year when I was all of 20 years old. I then did a DipEd, Diploma of Education. Now they do a master's, and I became a high school art teacher. And after a year, we went overseas and did some temporary work in London, and then took off around Europe in a combi van for 3 months, as you did. Came back to London, got a job, and I got a job as the EA to the chairman and managing director of a creative consultancy, an advertising creative consultancy. And they'd never had anyone in that role that had a degree before, and they loved me. And so I actually ended up as general manager of that business. But I used to get in cordon bleu cooks to do our boardroom lunches.
Yeah.
And I used to sit there and I think I could do this. What's this all about? Because we used to give, elaborate dinner parties. Anyway, so cut a long story short, came back to Australia in 1980, worked in advertising here. The food in our boardroom was appalling. And so then I left when I was sort of 9 months pregnant with my first child. And then he was a really good little baby. So when he was about 1, I started off, I pitched the managing director and general manager, the managing director's secretary and the general manager of the advertising agency I used to work for, and I started doing their boardroom lunches. And so he used to sleep 3 hours in the middle of the day. My sister used to mind him, and that's what happened. So I was still a corporate wife and essentially a full-time mum, but I was doing boardroom lunches.
Yeah,
there you go.
So obviously, being, I wouldn't say left to fend for yourself, but being left to cook for yourself at 16, I'm guessing you had some food muses when you were younger. I started cooking when I was a bit younger because my mum couldn't cook. She probably doesn't want me to say that, but I'm guessing you did have a couple of cooking muses growing up.
Yeah, well, the thing was, mum was a good home cook.
Yeah.
She didn't really use, she might occasionally use the recipe, but mum and dad would have a Christmas party for 70 people and mum would do all the food. It'd be a buffet. And, I was brought up in a family where there was always room for another 1, 2, 3, or 4 around our family dinner table.
Yeah.
And so I was brought up with the hospitality of the table. So I had a great appreciation for what mealtimes could be, which is something I tried to instill in my children. Certainly there was never any television or anything like that. And then when I think I might have been 17 when I bought the Margaret Fulton cookbook.
Yeah.
And that was my first cookbook. I saved up my pocket money and I bought the Margaret Fulton cookbook. So, and in the end, we became great friends. So I gave one of the eulogies at her memorial service. So, and I gave the speech at her 85th birthday. So yeah, that was very special. So that was my first cookbook. And then interestingly, I bought the Women's Weekly cookbook, not one of those little soft cover ones. It was a big one like the Margaret Fulton cookbook, which is quite ironic as I ended up there. But there wasn't any other person. And it wasn't that mum taught me particularly. It's just that she used to do it.
Yeah, and it obviously piqued an interest in yourself. So bearing in mind, when I say bearing in mind, yourself and I am aware that I've asked you to prepare a couple of recipes that our blind and low vision community may want to try at home, but it might be news to the people tuning in today. Just need to let people know we'll be sharing these recipes and links to YouTube with our participants after the webinar today. But one of these recipes is your mum's bran loaf. Can you talk us a little bit through that?
Oh, look, mum always made this. And I have to say that my son, right from when he was a little boy, just loved it. And he'd go to grandma and grandpa's, and the first thing he'd do would be to open the fridge to see what was in there. But he'd walk in the door and say, "Grandma, have you got any bran loaf?" And it's such an easy recipe, And I always double it, because if you're going to go to the bother, make 2 loaves, because it freezes really well. And you can use whatever dried fruit or nuts that you like. And actually, it's got no fat and no eggs, and it's high in fiber. And why it's great for people who are vision impaired is it's a simple mix and stir recipe. Okay, so it's quite forgiving. And the measurements are easy because you can feel them. So you're going to take a cup of bran cereal, like all bran, any bran cereal you like. You're going to have a cup of milk. You can use low-fat milk if you like, or you can use normal milk. And you've got a cup of self-raising flour, and then half a cup that's firmly packed of brown sugar, and then a teaspoon of cinnamon, a teaspoon of ginger, and a level teaspoon of bicarb soda, because that's going to stop it being too heavy. And then a cup of chopped, you can have pitted dates or walnuts or sultanas or raisins or mixed fruit, whatever you like and whatever you've got. And then half a cup of treacle or golden syrup. So a lot of those measurements are easy, a cup or half a cup, because you can feel it.
Yeah.
So you're going to preheat your oven to 180 degrees centigrade or 160 if it's fan force. And you can grease a 13 centimetre by 20 centimetre loaf tin and line it with baking paper, So 2 of those if you want to double up. This is just for one times the recipe. And the other thing too is different size loaf tins, they usually end up all working out.
Yeah.
Now, what you've got to do is soak the bran in milk in a large bowl for 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, that's to soften it up.
Yeah.
And then all you do is you add all those remaining ingredients. So you're going to add in, the cup of milk, the cup of flour, half a cup of brown sugar, teaspoon of cinnamon, teaspoon of ginger, level teaspoon of bicarb soda, and a cup of those chopped pitted dates or walnuts. Sultanas you don't even need to chop, and mixed fruit. And then your half cup of treacle or golden syrup. And you're just going to mix it all together with a wooden spoon. And then all you do is pour it into the tin and bake it in the lower half of the oven for 35 to 40 minutes or until it's brown on top. Now, if you can't tell whether it's brown on top, you can just But also, if you test it with a skewer, if you put the skewer into the middle of it, and you take it out, you can just put it on your lips, and if it's hot, it's probably cooked and not sticky. Then you know it's cooked. And then take it out of the oven, cool it, slice it, and butter it, and it'll store in an airtight container at room temperature for up to 3 days, but it never lasts that long in my house.
I can imagine
it's consumed before then.
Yeah, I can imagine. So even 2 loaves in that time, I reckon, would go pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's right. But that quantity is just for 1 loaf. And the reason I gave you this recipe is not only because it's mum's, because it's just a plain old, mix and stir recipe, but because I have got it up on my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So people there have the opportunity to stop and start, to make sure they've got it what they want to do.
Yeah, definitely. And can I ask, once it's cooked and that sort of thing, can you toast it at a later stage?
Absolutely. It's delicious toasted.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I'm glad I ate lunch before we started this, because I was thinking I'd probably drool down my chin otherwise.
Well, yes, I had mine as well. Yes, it's not a good thing to talk about food when you're hungry.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So obviously, that sounds quite simplistic. I reckon our audience would love to do that. And as well, if you're pouring into a cake tin as well, there's things like a level indicator as well that could direct people when they're getting close to the top on that. So yeah, the really easy recipe. So yeah, I'm inclined to give that one a go myself as well.
Yeah. And I think because the measurements are easy as well.
Yeah.
I mean, in the written recipe, I've given you the weights as well. But most people, I wouldn't know what 60 grams of bran cereal looks like, but I know what a cup looks like.
Yeah.
So I have given you both measurements.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So moving on to my next question is around the many areas you've branched into, including being somewhat of a pioneer in partnering of food and wine in Australia. What drove you to be passionate about wine?
Well, it's all comes back to the hospitality of the table. My parents didn't drink at all until they were 40, and then they just have a brandy and dry before dinner. But if they had friends over, they'd have wine. It's just that, so by 1981, I'm catering, but obviously I was drinking wine before then because I was giving dinner parties.
Yeah.
And so then I became increasingly interested in how food and wine went together. So not only in terms of conviviality and hospitality, but how the flavor of a wine could impact on the food, or the flavor of food could impact on wine. And, I like to say that, matching food and wine, we're looking for a marriage made in heaven and not a blind date.
Yeah.
You want each to uplift the other. If they fight, if the food and wine fight, then it's not a pleasurable experience. You want them to absolutely, like a good relationship, elevate each other.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And, a lot of truth to what you've said in regards to, you can have a fantastic food and fantastic wine, but if they don't complement each other.
Yes.
It's
perfect. Perfect example. If you like to have a lot of chili in your food, if you try and eat that and drink like a wooded Chardonnay or a wooded Cabernet, those wines, the tannin that comes from the wood, tannin also can come from grapes, but it fights with the capsaicin in the chili.
Yeah.
So whereas if you put it with a softer wine like a Pinot Noir or a Shiraz, or if you put it in a wine with a bit of fruit sweetness like a Riesling, it's going to be much better. And I found that all fascinating. So I really came into wine from a food perspective.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of knowledge that goes into learning about different wines, and obviously a bit of trial and error, I'd imagine, as well.
Yeah.
Potentially while you're on a combi trip around Europe, I imagine there was a bit of trial and error.
Oh, well, the main thing there was actually we were on a budget, so you were just but you know what? The local village wine in Europe tends to be very good.
Yeah, definitely heard that. I haven't experienced it myself, but I am looking
it's also it's probably also the environment, but yeah.
So going on from that, and also being aware of your passion for empowering people to learn to cook, I thought I'd ask you to walk us through your recipe from plates, real food for fast people, your microwave mushroom
Oh,
risotto.
this is brilliant. Now, I've got a great story about this. So it was my photographer who gave me this recipe. He did the photos for my first 3 books.
Yeah.
I used to work with him because I used to write a column in the Sydney Weekly. And we'd get together and we'd do 6 recipes in 3 hours, which is unheard of. Normally for a photo shoot, you take a day for that many. Anyway, and he told me about this recipe. Now, it's really interesting. So before I was writing a story on matching sparkling wine and champagne with food for Gourmet Traveller Wine magazine. And I decided to do a trial dinner. And Tetsuya Okuda, one of Australia's most famous chefs, is a good friend of mine. And I had him around, and Simon Johnson, who was the founder of Simon Johnson Food, and Peter Bourne, who's a wine writer and wine consultant, and my son was there. And I asked everybody to bring some food that they thought would go with champagne.
Mm.
And so I did lots of food as well. And I did this, and Simon Johnson was, you can't make risotto in a microwave. Tetsuya loved it. Now, I reckon if Tetsuya, one of the finest palates in Australia, loved it, then it's okay for me too. And it's something that you can make. It's something that you can make, and you can make it with ingredients that you may just have in your pantry. So let's go with it. So 1 cup, once again, easy measurement, 1 cup of arborio rice. Now, arborio rice is risotto rice, and it has the ability to absorb 3 times its volume of liquid. And that's why you're going to end up, and you want something creamy. You don't, not gluggy, but you don't want separate grains like you might have with steamed rice.
Yeah.
Do not use other arborio rice is the rice to use for it. Okay. And then you want 3 cups of chicken or vegetable stock, or half stock and water. Now, if you like, you can use a good quality stock cube. A good quality one, you can use that if you like. If you don't, I like liquid stock. But if this is just something you want to be able to find in the cupboard, why not? Okay. So you're just going to put, you need a microwave safe container with a firmly fitting lid. And you're going to put in your 1 cup of arborio rice, your 3 cups of chicken or vegetable stock, or water with stock cubes. Now, a packet, 20 grams is usually a packet of porcini mushrooms. Now, they're dried and they give a lovely pungent flavour. And crumble them up. You don't have to rehydrate them at all. And then you're going to put in a slosh of extra virgin olive oil. It's a very technical thing, about a tablespoon if you want to be precise, but a slosh. Some salt and pepper, not too much. Depending on your stock, you might need less salt or more. Okay, you're going to put that all in, mix it up, cover it, and cook it on high for 20 minutes in the microwave. Walk away, go open your bottle of wine, do whatever you want to do, and then take it out of the oven. Now, one thing, make sure when you take that lid off, you take it off away from yourself.
Yeah.
Don't tilt it towards you, or the steam might come up and burn you. Okay. Yeah. So just make sure you open it away from you. Okay. And then there's probably a bit of liquid left. Stir it, and you just stir it all through, and then just leave it to stand for 5 minutes to complete the cooking and absorb the liquid.
Yeah.
And then you can just add another good slosh of olive oil or a knob of butter to be more traditional. I love finishing it with butter, I must say. And then mix that through, and you can stir through as well some freshly grated Parmesan cheese and some on the top. And that is it.
Very simple, and it sounds very, very, very nice.
It is delicious. Now, I've used that principle to do some others. Now, when you make, I mean, I love risotto and I love making a risotto, but you've got to stand there, you do your onion, then you toast your rice, then you put in a glass of wine and you've got to bubble that off and stuff. This is easy and it's so perfect.
And it sounds like real comfort food as well.
It's delicious. I always have those ingredients. I mean, everything keeps in the pantry except the Parmesan. Well, I always have a block of Parmesan in my fridge anyway.
Yeah.
So I can make that at a minute's notice.
Yeah, and I'm guessing it obviously pairs with champagne. Do you have a champagne of choice that you would recommend with it?
Yeah, I'll tell you what's interesting about that. It's lovely with Pinot Noir as well.
Yeah.
It went an aged champagne so when champagne is made, it has its first ferment. It's just mixed like a wine. Okay, It's blended like any wine. And then it goes through its first fermentation. And then they put in the yeast, so it goes through secondary fermentation in the bottle.
Yeah.
And what happens is the yeast cells react with the sugar, and then any sweetness in the wine, and then they drop to the bottom of the bottle.
Yeah.
Right. And then what they do in champagne, it's called riddling. The wine goes in a rack, so it's on an angle. So all those dead yeast cells will go down to the neck, okay? And then it's twisted till they all go down there. Now, those are called yeast lees. And a wine or a champagne that's been on yeast lees, a sparkling wine or a champagne that's been on yeast lees for a long time, and in champagne, like they have to be on there for like 3 years or something, it gets a lovely toasty character. It gets a richer character. And that was the style of champagne or sparkling wine I found went with this really well. Because the other thing about champagne and sparkling wine is those bubbles act like little brooms on your tongue to cleanse those taste buds so you're ready for your next mouthful of food.
Yeah.
Very clever, really.
Yeah, quite clever. Quite clever. And it kind of goes in also with your philosophy around supporting Australian-made and locally produced food.
Yes.
I'm guessing.
Yes, except porcini. We might have porcini mushrooms are often imported, I have to be honest. But there are some here now, and there are some that are being done. But, if something's available in Australia, I certainly do like to use it. Like I always use Australian extra virgin olive oil, for example. Yeah. Australian butter.
And you've got, well, I mean, you've had quite a few award-winning cookbooks, but one that I'm focusing on at this particular point in time, Taste of Australia.
Yeah. I won best TV chef cookbook in the world for that.
Yeah. Well, I was getting to that, so you preempted me, so thank you.
Sorry.
No, it was good. So have you always had like a passion for Australian made and locally produced food, or was it something that you sort of learnt doing your research for this book? Or
no, well, that book actually went with a TV series of the same name.
Yeah.
But I'm a sixth generation Australian, and I was brought up by my parents, but my mother especially, to be very proud but also grateful for being Australian.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is. I am not from the country, but I feel really at home in the bush.
Yeah.
And I'm on the Council of the Royal Agricultural Society of New South Wales, have been since 1996. I was the third ever woman, and I ended up as the first female vice president. And I just really believe in Australian agriculture. And I also think that if we didn't have farmers, I wouldn't have a job. And that I need to be respectful of farmers, because it's the farmers who produce what we eat. And if we don't have that, we starve. And we really need to preserve Australian land and Australian sovereignty. And we really need to support our farmers. And so on that note, I've been an Australia Day ambassador this will be my 21st year, and I'm going off to Collyambley and Darlington Point on Wednesday.
Yeah.
I just think, we're part of a society, Okay. And Australia is made up of many different people, many different cultures. I mean, you acknowledge the Indigenous owners. And, I had friends, Janice and Ray Kirsch, who opened a restaurant in 1981, Edna's Table, and they pioneered using Indigenous ingredients. Now it's a no-brainer, but also we've been enhanced by the many waves of migrants who've come here.
Yeah.
And that's why we've got such an interesting and dynamic cuisine, but we need the raw produce. And also we have very ethical farming standards here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And, every farmer I have ever met regards themselves as custodians of the land, and they want to leave it better than they found it. And, they're really not there to exploit it. They are, there might be, the few exceptions to the rule, but they're there. They want to enrich the soil. They want to make the soil better for future generations. And I think we need to support them. I mean, I look on the back of packages. I mean, at the Royal Agricultural Society of New South Wales, we pioneered all of the food competitions in Australia. Like, we started olive oil there in 1998. Yeah. And look at what's happened with Australian olive oil. It's extraordinary. So we know what we're getting when you see, you just got to be very careful about that Australian made,
yes,
logo. You've got to make sure what it is, and especially, with bacon and things like that. But if you can find that pork star sign, you know that it's Australian. Yeah. So we just need to support the people who feed us.
Makes perfect sense. And I guess in Australia as well, we're quite lucky with the food that we do have. It's rated among the best in the world.
Well, look, it is. And the thing is, and I mean, I know it's, there's been some pretty massive price increases, but it has always been affordable and accessible. Whereas overseas, it isn't necessarily. It depends where you are. Obviously, in a lot of places, it really is. And, I know rising food prices are a worry, but if you look at the poor farmers, they have floods, they have drought, they have bushfire.
Yeah.
It's
that's just the last 2 years.
Yeah. Oh, and then a global pandemic.
Yeah.
That's why. But and I think it's good because we're getting more aware of unnecessary packaging and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. And the costs associated with importing as well.
Absolutely. And
once again, during a pandemic.
Not only the financial cost, but the food miles and environmental cost.
Yeah. So obviously going around, we haven't had a formal a formal theme for our group of webinar speakers, but we've had a blind man that has, climbed mountains, run across the desert, flown a microlight from the UK to Australia.
No.
Yeah. Incredible guy. We also had Christine Courtney, who was speaking about her late husband, Bryce, in her most recent book. But we've had some rather remarkable adventurers. And I know in the writing of Taste of Australia, you did some rather remarkable adventures around Australia. Can you give us a little bit of information about some of that?
Oh, well, I did all sorts of things. So I rode a camel. I'm sick to death of riding camels. Can I tell you? I did ride one in Morocco last year, though. Yes, no. So certainly I rode a camel. I rode a Brumby. I'm riding the Brumby and the horse next to it kicks it and started galloping. Oh, and of course, no stack hat or anything. I did have an akubra on. What else did I was in a hot air balloon. I went, I did the Segway thingo. What else? I'll tell you what was amazing. This wasn't quite so scary. I'll tell you what was very cold up in Orange, though, in the middle of winter, gold panning.
Yeah.
And but what was incredible was I went mud crabbing in Western Australia. So it was about an hour and a half south of Broome. with a young man, very young man, who was half Indigenous and half Japanese.
Yeah.
And his father had taught him how to do it respectfully. So we went out mud crabbing, and you're not allowed to catch, I don't think you're allowed to catch any females, and the males had to be bigger than a certain size.
Yeah.
So we went out, it was amazing. And there was a turtle that was had been grounded by the low tide. So we took the turtle out and put it back into the water. And anyway, so we ended up with a male mud crab that was, over the allowed size. And he just put some driftwood on the beach and lit it and put the crab on it. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. That was really, really memorable, But I've done all sorts of things, I went fishing in Ireland, and, I've done lots of things, and you think, oh, really? Yeah.
How are you as a fisherman, Lyndey? I seem to be very good at catching rocks.
Oh, actually, I used to go fishing with my dad when I was a little girl with a line. So this was in Ireland when I did Taste of Ireland, and it was with a fabulous chef called Martin Shanahan, who's got a restaurant called Fishy Fishy. And we went out, but what they do is they have a line, but it's got several hooks on it.
Yeah.
And I managed to catch 5. Unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. It was, lots of screaming and
Some would
whatever.
say it was almost scripted, wouldn't they?
Yeah. But normally fish, as soon as there's a camera, fish don't come. So,
yeah.
Oh no, it was in Lyndey and Herbie's Movable Feast. We were out of Wagga, and we're in a lake and we're fishing. And I almost got a bite, but then no, they disappear. They know the cameraman's there. They disappear. Yeah.
Not saying
but
animals.
I travelled up through Australia on the GAN as well, but that was when I was doing fresh with the Australian Women's Weekly. But it's great, and the fantastic producers and farmers that you get to meet, it's incredible. But it's so frustrating because you might be there for half a day, and you really get to know them, and you want to stay longer.
Yeah. And that's through the lens of these books and television as well. There's some amazing characters that you may or may not have actually ever got to meet in person. Definitely beneficial for people in Australia to know that those sort of people are around, I think.
Absolutely. And look, they're the heroes of my book. So I actually won best food TV series in the world as well for the TV series. And then with the cookbook, as I told you, I got best in the world. And then in the best of the best for the last 20 years, this is a few years ago, at the Frankfurt Book Fair, it came 3rd overall. Some bloke called Jamie Oliver won, but I've never heard of him.
No, I never heard of him.
But for me, that was a win. That was a win for the producers and the farmers of Australia, because they were the heroes, and and that means the winemakers as well, because of course we had to go and see winemakers.
Of course.
Tough job, but someone's got to do it.
So what I'll do is I'll segue at this point in time just to remind people. So we are at the halfway point of the webinar today. If you do have any questions that you'd like to send through to us, just a reminder that if you are using a screen reader, the keystroke is Alt-H to type in your question, and using the Zoom chat function on here, that will obviously send the question through to me to direct to Lyndey. So get your questions in. We're halfway through, and I'd love to get those over to Lyndey. Otherwise, as I said, we'll send her some questions after the webinar if you have any that you think of later. So tell me, in regards to Taste of Australia, and I know I'm focusing on this book, but it's a really, really good book. What sort of preparation and writing process went into that? Was it something that just kind of came to you that when you were thinking about the idea of what you wanted to do, or was it something that was driven by some people that helped you out? Like, what was the process around the creation of that book?
Well, no, it came from the TV show first. And so getting up a TV show is very difficult, because no longer do networks give you a big commission and lots of money to go away and make a TV show. So you've got to work very hard to get the funding together, from the likes of, tourist boards, Tourism Western Australia. I did 3 episodes over there, Destination New South Wales. We got, the railway. We got help from them and from Qantas. So first of all, you got to get all your funding in place, okay?
Yeah.
And so then you've got to research where you're going to go and what you're going to do in the show, but while also satisfying your sponsors. So obviously, if Tourism Western Australia wanted to support 3 episodes, we did 3 episodes in Western Australia. Yeah. And to me, that's great, because it's not branded where you're saying, buy this brand of soft drink. None of that. And so we would work with the tourist bodies about places they wanted us to go as well. The guy at Destination New South Wales said, I want an image of you on the beach feeding a kangaroo. Well, I want you to know we got it. Anyway, that was amazing. So the TV series came first.
Yeah.
And so it's when that was done and that was edited, what I did was everybody that I saw in the TV show, I asked them to send me one of their recipes as well as my recipes, because what I would do in each episode, so there were 16 episodes of half an hour, I would do 3 recipes in each episode, using ingredients from the producers and the farmers that I met along the way.
Yeah.
And so obviously those formed some of the recipes. Then I got recipes from the people I interviewed, and we saw chefs as well. I mean, I cooked with chefs as well. And then I looked at the overall pattern of that to see where there were gaps, and therefore came up with some other recipes to make it a complete picture.
Yeah, definitely. So you've already touched on the Royal Agricultural Society, so you preempted me on that one as well. So thank you for that as well.
Sorry.
Don't be. That's good. So it means we're on the right page with one another. So you said that you sort of got into that 3rd female member of the society, first vice president.
Yep, first female vice president.
First female vice president. Yeah. Had you sort of worked with them previously, or through your sort of work previously? Yeah.
Well, yes, I had. Well, what happened was I was invited as a celebrity judge for the cheese competition, for the dairy competition. And anyway, I didn't think at the time that it was run as well as it could have been run.
Yeah.
And so I wrote to them. I wrote to the chairman of the Dairy Produce Committee with some recommendations and ways that I felt it could be improved.
Yeah.
So he ended up inviting me in for lunch one day. We talked about it, and then it was definitely a time of affirmative action. And so he then said to me, he said, we need to get some more women on the council. Are you interested? And so, I was very well and truly entrenched in food and in the media and everything. By 1996, I'd done several TV shows. I hadn't gone to the weekly yet, but I was freelance and I was writing about food and wine, and I was doing radio and TV. So I was freelance and working for myself. So I did, and I was incredibly honoured because my parents courted at the Easter show. And so I am very proudly what I call an Easter show tragic. I just love it. I love it. And I cooked at the show, did cooking dems at the show way before that, from 1987 right up until the year before COVID. Yeah. And now I host something called Talk and Taste. Ed Halmaji, Fast Ed and I share the hostings, and we interview. We have 2 different producers that enter our competitions each day, and we interview them and do tastings with the audience of their food. And it's worth saying, when we talk about these competitions, you're probably more familiar with seeing a medal on a wine bottle. Yeah. Well, we want to reward good producers, and it's really important that this is done to a very high standard and impartially. So we judge blind. you have 3 judges to a panel, so one person can't sway the other. They
Yeah.
judge on a tablet so that the chairman of judges can keep an eye on what's happening. And if you see a Sydney Royal Medal, gold, silver or bronze on a product, it is your guarantee of absolute excellence.
Brilliant. And obviously, with Easter coming up, that's
Yeah, I'll be out
fantastic.
there.
Yeah, I was going to ask that actually. So I guess my next question would be in regards to your career in media. From the outside looking in, it seems to have been a rather obvious fit with your career, the way that it's gone. Was it an easy decision to make at the time to get into media?
Well, I just found a roundabout way of being a performer. I mean,
Yeah.
I wanted to go to NIDA when I left school, but I wasn't allowed. I had to go to university and get a degree. So I've just found a roundabout way of being a performer.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's not that it's anything I sort of thought about, is I sort of see opportunities or make opportunities and grab them. And I guess it all started off with radio. So John Brennan, who only died a couple of years ago, yeah, in fact, COVID had started because I remember watching his funeral online. He was known as the Kingmaker. He put Alan Jones on air. He discovered a whole lot of people. Anyway, I met him and he said to me, "You'd be a natural on radio." And I started doing a food and wine segment in 1987, I think.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Great body for radio too, you know. So I like it because the challenge is to communicate without the benefit of pictures. And I think that's something that, you know, our viewers today would very much identify with. And my mother, who said to me, she said, "When you're on the radio, I can hear every word you say." So it's the opportunity to paint pictures in the mind. And so, you know, I started in radio and radio was my first love. And then I started writing and then I started doing TV as well. But they're very different, you know.
Yeah, I was going to ask that actually, because I've done my share of radio, and I've unfortunately had a camera put in my face as well with TV as well. And I have to admit, I do prefer radio. But the written form that, you know, that with the Women's Weekly and that sort of thing, going from radio to that, was there a bit of apprehension? It's a very different.
Oh, no. No, I'm not a scaredy cat. But also, no, but I didn't go to the Weekly until 1999. I'd already been at ACP, as it then was, to start another magazine called Australian Table.
Yeah.
But I was doing recipes on radio way back then, my own recipes. And I brought out my first cookbook, which went to 4 print runs in 1995. That was Plates, Real Food for Fast People. And, you know, and we've done one of those recipes today. You know, those recipes still stand the test of time. So by the time I went to the Weekly, I'd had another book in 1997, Flavours of Fresh Approach. And in 99, I brought out Lyndey Milan's Fabulous Food, and also Balls, the all-round cookbook that I co-authored with Lukey Whirl. So I was very familiar with that. But when I say writing, I don't mean recipe writing. I mean writing articles, like proper long-form articles. And I love the discipline of the written word. I just think how you can just change things by changing punctuation, or I really do like that as well. So no, I had to be persuaded to go to the Women's Weekly.
Do you mind me asking why?
Because I was at Australian Table and I loved it. We'd started it. We'd only just got it launched. But then someone that I knew and respected had gone to the Women's Weekly as the editor.
Yeah.
And so she asked me, and I thought, and I was wrong, by the way. I thought, Women's Weekly is an old ladies magazine, but it wasn't. And then I thought, well, if I'm really a food evangelist, you know, because I want to empower Australians to cook Australian produce, then I've got to go to the Women's Weekly. So, you know, we ended up with, you know, a circulation of then 750,000 copies. We had a readership of well over 2 million because people would pass it on. And, you know, I mean, recipes in the Women's Weekly are something you can believe in. And actually being there, though, it taught me about making sure recipes are very, very, very precise. Now, I have deliberately today with the microwave mushroom risotto not been that precise, because for that recipe you don't need to. You know, you can put in a splash of olive oil, but I have got the measurements in there and the weights as well. And that's something it taught me. They're very well written recipes.
Yeah, definitely. And I imagine you probably influenced a lot of people to do home cooking during that time, obviously.
Yeah, well, we won we came third for the World Food Media Awards.
Yeah.
And then subsequently, after I left and I went back and I was just a contributor, you know, the Women's Weekly won one again. So, you know, out there. And also, when I was there, per head of population, it was the most read magazine in the world.
Yeah.
Like, what an extraordinary, and, you know, we're talking about being custodians. You know, I was the custodian of the food. I was charged with keeping all the loyal readers, but getting some new ones. But I was only the custodian of food in the weekly for that time. Just as the editor said, she believed that she was the custodian of the magazine.
Yeah. So speaking of that, as you touched on, you are an Australia Day ambassador, and I'd be remiss not to mention Australia Day happening this Thursday. For those wanting to spend some time in the kitchen entertaining, can you walk us through, I don't want to say devilish, but can you walk us through a heavenly chocolate recipe, the chocolate pretzel marshmallow slice?
This is ridiculous, this recipe. I made it up. It is so easy. It breaks all the rules. Now, you know, when you make, I'll never forget, you know, that classic slice that's sort of like, it's got biscuit crumbs, and then it's got caramel, and then it's got chocolate.
Yeah.
That takes so long to make, because you've got to make the bottom layer and let it set. Then you've got to make the next layer and let it set. And then you've got to do the next layer. So I thought there's got to be an easier way. So this is nothing like that, I need to say. Okay, so preheat your oven to moderate, which is 180 degrees centigrade, or 160 if it's fan force. Now, I used a 33 by 24 by 4.5 centimetre baking tray with baking paper, but really you want a baking tray that's got sides on, and not a massive one and not too small, right? But if it's smaller, it'll just be thicker. It'll just take longer to cook. So you're going to take 250 grams of shortbread biscuits. Now, if you've got a food processor, you can make that into breadcrumbs in the food processor, and then add 100 grams of melted butter just until you combine it. And once again, you know, melt your butter in the microwave just in small bursts. Much easier way to do it than in a pan. Now, if you don't have a food processor, you can put the biscuits in a strong plastic bag, cover them with a tea towel, and there's a typo in there. I said cover with a T2. That's meant to say tea towel, and bash and roll it with a rolling pin until they break up, and then put them in a bowl, a big bowl, and mix with butter in the bowl. But then what you're going to do is, all you've got to do is press that over the base of the tin and push it down.
Yeah.
Okay, so just try and press it as evenly as you can down. Now, then you're going to scatter over. You can get the, you know, they're called choc bits, or sometimes they're called chocolate buttons or chocolate chips.
Yeah.
So you want 250 grams of dark chocolate bits. Scatter that over the base, and then you can get little baby marshmallows, because then you don't have to do any chopping. 150 grams of baby marshmallows, and then 75 grams of little mini pretzels that you can crush or chop, and 250 grams of whatever nuts you like, pecans, walnuts, macadamias, and just roughly chopped as well. Okay, so you've just scattered all that all over, right? Then you're going to sprinkle with a 395 gram can of condensed milk. Now, what's not to love about condensed milk? Okay, so, sorry, first of all, so you've got to sprinkle it with some, sorry, I got that round the wrong way, 100 grams of milk chocolate buttons and 100 grams of white chocolate buttons. And then you put the condensed milk all over the top, okay? And then it just goes into the oven for 25 to 30 minutes, or until it's mostly firm. once again, if you feel like it's browning too much, you can cover the top with foil, but I've never had that problem.
Okay.
So, and if it's a smaller tin and deeper, you'll need to cook it for a bit longer, okay?
Yeah.
And because it won't be rock hard when you've finished cooking it. You don't want it to be, because it's meant to be a bit gooey and delicious. But then leave it to cool completely, or you can put it in the fridge and then it'll really firm up. And cut it into small squares or slices to serve. But before serving, what I do is I put some dark chocolate in a snap lock bag, 125 grams, melt it, and you just cut the tip off this piping bag, and you can just go backwards and forwards over the top. Just makes it look fabulous.
Yeah.
And I actually do that after I've cut it. So I cut it and put it up on a plate and then do that. And it's very decadent, and you only need a small piece.
Yeah, I was going to say that's almost dinner and dessert on that one.
Oh, it's very rich, but it's so easy.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to give that one a crack this Thursday. I feel like we need to ask, obviously, due to your experience with wine, does it have a coupling with wine?
I think you need a strong cup of coffee with that.
Strong cup of coffee, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want wine, you'd really need to go with a fortified wine, you know, a liqueured muscat or a tokay or a topac, as we now have to call it,
Yeah.
because of our agreement with the EC. But a fortified wine, a port.
Yeah.
But it's going to, I don't know if it's going to be port drinking weather on Thursday.
That's it probably won't be.
Yeah. Oh, you could go on iced coffee probably, as long as it's not too rich. But yeah, that is a very, very rich slice.
Yeah. Yeah. I almost cannot wait.
Now, did I give you, actually, do you know what? That's on my YouTube. Oh, yes, it's up the top. You can see me make that on YouTube as well.
Yeah, definitely. And as I said, we're going to share that around with everyone jumping along today. I've made a habit of asking people this particular question, but I've had some really interesting answers to it. Obviously, as you said, you've been very keen just to take on new things going through your career. Is there any advice you would have given your younger self at any time forging a career in media, or is there any advice you can give somebody else that might be interested in going into that field?
I'll tell you one thing I regret. Harry M. Miller, the celebrity manager, many years ago, it was after my marriage had broken up, but I was a single mum with 2 young children.
Yeah.
And he gave me 20 cents to make a phone call to him to manage me, and I gave it back and said, Harry, I can't afford you. And I was a very silly girl, because he would have taken 25%, but he would have got me out there and earning stuff much sooner because of his contact. So yeah, but I just think we all have to believe in ourselves. If you can find a mentor, that's fantastic. I've got a female chef mentoring program I've been running through TAFE for 15 years.
Yeah.
If you can find a mentor, then that's the best thing I think you can do.
Very, very sound advice. So, Lyndey, Milan, what have you got planned for 2023? Should we expect any New Year's resolutions or anything like that?
Well, I'm going to have a look at what the opportunities are. I'm a very energetic person, and I want to conquer new fields. I host culinary tours, but I did 2 last year, but they'd both been postponed 3 times because of COVID.
Of course, yeah.
So I didn't have any organised for this year, but I will for next year. But I've got a few things I'm doing. There's the Easter show for Tasting Australia, which is a South Australian festival. I'm the guest chef at A Taste of Streaky Bay in May. I'm also hosting a masterclass on tea and tannin, because I did a postgraduate academic course in taste in France a few years ago, and I wrote a thesis where I looked at the different cuisines of China. There are 8, looked at the teas they drank, and then looked to see if I could find a comparison with wine. So teas are white, yellow, green, dark, black, pu'er, oolong.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm doing that with Adelaide University, and I'm also going to be guest chef at the Bellingen show in May.
So just a couple of things then.
Yeah. But if people want to hop on my website and subscribe, I send out a weekly newsletter to subscribers, which has got recipes, wine, what's happening, things like that. So if they go on my website, it's the bottom left-hand side of the landing page, but just be aware that you'll be sent a verification link and it might go to your junk. So you might need to go in there to verify it.
Yeah, definitely. So we're getting to, well, we're a couple of minutes out. So this will be the point where I obviously thank our guest for today, who's been so giving with her time. So thank you so much for coming along and speaking to us. It's been, I know how many feedback emails I'm going to get saying how much they enjoyed today. So in advance, it's been fantastic. Once again, we will be sharing the recipes, and a couple more will be shared as well with our audience today. After today's webinar, we'll also provide all of the links to jump on your YouTube and have a look at all of that, and to follow along and stop and start where needed. Lyndey, Milan, thank you once again so much for your time.
Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure.
Vision Australia.
Blindness,
Low vision.
Opportunity.
Vision Australia logo, 3 navy blue ovals linked together diagonally within a bright yellow rectangle.